Hello, and welcome to Focus Wherever. In today's Garage Series video, I'm going to try once again to beat the Florida heat. This time by bringing car washing from outside to inside. This is a two-part video. This first part focuses on the car wash build process. Be sure to check out part 2, where I test it out and see if I can contain the water inside a crowded garage. So with that as the goal, let's get focused. Alright, today's video is going to be the next step in making my garage more useful for doing projects anytime I want, staying out of the heat, staying out of the sun. In the last video, I installed a portable air conditioner to make it much more comfortable to work in here. I'll link that video in the description below, where I mostly focus on how I got the hot air out of a garage that has no windows and no side door, and prevented hot air from coming back in, building the barriers to keep the hot air out of the garage. And so far I'm liking how that's working. It's a hot day today, 79 degrees in here, and most importantly keeping the humidity down, pretty comfortable in here even though it's not particularly low temperature. It feels good. So I got a good temperature. Now I want to make it so that I can do wet projects inside the garage, and what I mean by that is build myself an indoor car wash bay. So the goal of the indoor car wash is to build barriers that allow me to wash a car like I regularly would inside, and of course be out of the heat and the sun making it virtually impossible to wash outside in the Florida heat, the Florida sun, without the soap or the rinse water from drying in a matter of a couple minutes. Bring all that indoors and build barriers so that the other things in the garage don't get soaked. I do park a car in the garage, do have lots of things stored. So we're going to focus on this main center space here, and like I said, build barriers kind of in two categories here. For the ceiling, hanging plastic sheeting from the ceiling to direct water, sprayed water, deflected water down to the floor, again before it can reach any of the other things. So yeah, things that'll hang from the ceiling, plastic sheeting, a grommet kit, some hooks that'll end up getting used to protect the garage door opener, and some zip ties. I don't intend to take the plastic sheeting all the way up to the ceiling. I don't think the water will deflect up that high, and I'd like to have a little air circulation because the perimeter of the sheeting is going to be pretty complete, so I need some air to be able to move. If I have the garage door closed, I need it to be able to go up and over the top of the plastic sheeting. So these are the items that are going to bring the water down to the floor. Then once the water's on the floor, it needs to be directed out of the garage. I've got garage door thresholds, 3 of them, and essentially I'm going to put these around the roughly 17 by 13 foot square, or rectangle I should say, that I'm going to be doing, and that'll be essentially like a curb that'll force the water to run out. I've tested it before that my garage floor does have a slight tilt, as is fairly common, towards the garage door. Some water will stand for sure when doing a wash in here, but eventually there'll be enough to make it flow out towards the garage door and out into the driveway. Could get a little tricky in a few spots, getting it kind of up and onto the pavers where the transition from the concrete to the pavers happens, but I might end up putting a couple strategic beads of caulk to kind of get it into some of the grooves of the pavers and moving away from the garage floor. Like I said, I've fiddled with that before, and it works generally pretty well. So the thresholds will direct the water towards the garage door and out. And to keep it from the water from running underneath the thresholds, first I'm going to anchor it down with just a couple spots of construction adhesive. Nothing too crazy here, because this is mostly just to keep the thresholds still while I'm using the caulk to keep the water from running underneath them. The Velcro will attach the plastic sheeting to the elevated part of this curb that I'm going to build and basically keep the plastic sheeting from being pushed back by the force of water spray. A few pieces of Velcro attaching the sheeting to the threshold will keep that from flopping around. So these are the items for the floor, the sheeting for the walls essentially, and then a few other items which just had around the house. Not all of them are critical. I'm going to clean up the floor a little bit. Of course, a ladder to get up to the ceiling, and drill some pilot holes. Use the plumb bob to get the hooks as close to over top of where the curb is. So that's the plan, that's the supplies. I'm going to start up top and start setting my hooks. I've got these pretty substantial stainless steel hooks. The threads are 1 inch here, which is perfect for what I'm trying to do. Not a lot of weight. I mean, these are pretty substantial plastic sheets, 4 mil. So altogether there's some weight, but not particularly heavy. But a nice hook here with a 1 inch thread on it, 1/2 inch to get through the drywall, which will put a 1/2 inch into the framing. That's plenty to hold up the sheeting. And then a good size hook where I can get the plan for actually hooking it again to leave a little airspace is to use zip ties through the grommets, and then the zip ties will go over the hooks. So now I got to get my hooks in the ceiling. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was, if you're building a home, last step before the drywall goes up, come into the home and take pictures of every possible surface. Hundreds of pictures if needed, to see everything before the drywall goes up. And here I've done that. So I know from my pictures exactly where the framing, where the studs are behind here. So from those pictures, I know that one of the front to back anchor points, the framing and the ceiling, is just to the left of that junction box. So those hooks will be running front to back in the garage along that beam. To get the water moved towards the door, this particular side is going to have a 45-degree turn to get it over from the primary position of the sidewall over to directing the sprayed water and the water on the ground, a turn to get out through the door. So the last hook, one hook, will be, I know again from the pictures that there's a framing right above that wood right there. On the other side, the other front to back, I know from the pictures that there is framing about 2.5 cinder blocks to the right of that piece of wood right there, which is perfect to come up alongside the shelves here. And so altogether, this is going to create a space about 17 by 13. Now going across the back on side to side, I'll have to find the framing inside the ceiling there, but got my stud finder. So I'm ready to start marking the locations of where I want to put the screws in. The hooks, I'm going to put hooks in about every 3.5 feet. That'll space them out fairly evenly over the 17 and the 13 foot sides. So ready to start measuring, marking, and drilling the pilot holes to get those screws in the ceiling. All right, a quick look at the measuring and marking for the first side. Use the stud finder to locate the front position and 17 feet away, hook in the stud in the back position. Used a string to make a straight line between the two, and each tape mark is about 3.5 feet from each other. So with all that marked up, ready to install the remaining hooks on this side. All done with the first side, a total of 6 hooks, all securely threaded into the framing behind the drywall, all nicely lined up. One side down, 2 to go. First major milestone complete, 16 hooks around the ceiling. Altogether, this did end up making a shape of 17 feet by 13 feet. And there's the one that turns to go a little bit closer to the garage door where the water will be directed out. I mentioned earlier about using a string on that left side. It's worth noting that that's not a surefire way to be aligned with the studs or with the framing that's in there. Now again, in this garage, the framing goes front to back, so I still have the string up here so that I had a straight line between the 2 corners, and then found the studs with the stud finder. But earlier I had the string on this left side going front to back, which is a general indication of following the framing. But over a long run like that, the wood can actually curve, even to the extent that a straight line between 2 endpoints could get close to an edge, or even potentially outside of the framing if the beam in there is quite curved. So in my case, the string that was front to back did stay in line with the framing, but I confirmed everything with the stud finder. So if you use the string, double check that every point that you're going to fasten something is still within the beam. All right, ceiling work is done for now. Now it's time to clean up the floor. Next major step is all done, which is getting the floor all cleaned up. The reason I'm spending so much time making sure it's clean, getting all the oil and dirt off, is to get the best possible adhesion for first the construction adhesive that I'm going to use to just kind of set the curbs, the barriers, and then also same for the caulk that'll waterproof the bottom edge of those curbs. Just want the floor as clean as possible so these will perform their best. So next up, time to line up the garage door thresholds, which will become the curbs, around the same shape, 17 by 13, to serve as the lower barrier to direct water out the garage door. Progress report. I have rolled out and cut all of the bottom barrier that'll direct the water out of the garage. To get it nice and straight, I used a level, just brought it up next to the barrier and just kind of moved it back and forth to get it nice and straight. Not perfect, but certainly good enough for my goals here. I opted not to use the construction adhesive underneath this rubber threshold. Once I put this stuff out on the floor, it just had enough weight to it to settle down nicely, and I figured it'd be easier to lift up without the construction adhesive when I want to do away with this down the road. I was worried that the construction adhesive would just make it too hard to pick up. And also, I did do some of the caulk on the 2 side pieces so far are caulked, and that alone clearly is enough to anchor this down to where it's not going to go anywhere. The inner side still needs to be waterproof so that water doesn't get under there, but in terms of just fixing the position of these to get everything initially set. Construction adhesive wasn't necessary. The caulk is more than enough. I am running into one issue, which is going to cause a bit of a detour. This siliconized sealant that I'm using is not curing properly. It's staying very tacky, even with plenty of time to cure. So I've only, like I said, got it on the two side pieces so far, but I just don't like how that's performing. It's going to trap dust and grass clippings and dirt and just all the stuff that floats around on a garage floor, and that's not good. So my plan here is for this back piece where I don't have any caulk yet and need to anchor it down, fix the position, switch to a different brand, slightly different product, same idea, but different manufacturer, see if I get any better results on a better cure with that product. And I may even bring it around, and because this is tacky still, I think silicone caulk on top of that silicone caulk will actually adhere. I may do a few inches of, with this new product, overlap and see if I can get it to solidify. If not, or even if it does, I may go with the second part of my new plan, which is a waterproof tape. More than likely, I'm going to end up covering that back edge of these two side pieces, the outer edge, with that waterproof tape. Probably make it a little easier to clean up, sweep it, even if this new caulk does cure better. So TBD on whether or not one or both of these will go all the way around on the inner edge. I want to see how they perform on the outer edge, but making good progress. The cuts in the corners are decent, not perfect, but the caulk will make those waterproof. So I got the basic shape, everything's lining up pretty well. Now I just need to finish anchoring it and sealing the front and back sides. All right, I've reached the next big milestone, which is finishing the lower barrier. I did end up using both caulk and waterproof tape around the entire perimeter just to clean up the appearance and double down on the waterproofing. I really don't want water getting underneath that rubber. I don't want it getting moldy under there, so 2 layers there, caulk and tape to keep it out. Where it meets the exit of the garage, I've got it set up so that it'll get the water out onto the pavers and find its way into the channels in the pavers and move away from the garage floor. The threshold there does go out onto the pavers just by a half an inch or so, but not enough to interfere with the garage door or the weather stripping underneath the garage door. So we'll see how that works in reality, but that should be enough to get it flowing away from the garage and not just getting caught up and coming back onto the floor or run along the edge of the pavers outside the perimeter. So yeah, all fastened down, taped up, looking pretty good. Taped up the corners, kind of got everything put back in place in terms of the everyday stuff that's spread around the garage. Cleaned everything up. And this is the side that has the turn to get the water out. Same situation here. Just got it right up against that weather stripping, but not interfering with it. In terms of where the slower barrier is relative to the sheets that are kind of come down, I've got them pretty much directly under the hooks where that tarp is going to hang. The only place that it's slightly different is over on this side. It's set in, the barrier, this lower barrier set in, I don't know, an inch or two. And the main reason I did that is I didn't want the barrier on the outside of this seam here. I wanted it to stop the water before it gets into that. It won't really make any difference in terms of how the tarp hangs down. It's an inch or two set in relative to the other two sides being right underneath the hanging locations for the tarp. One other note on these grooves, the notches here, as is typical as my house is settled, there were very fine cracks down in those notches. I went ahead and just caulked those up with a silicone caulk just to make sure no water really settles down in there or prevent too much water from going underneath the house. It's really not an issue if I didn't, but I had some extra. I figured I'd fill in those gaps, make it a little easier to clean up. So, yep, that's it. The lower barrier is done. I do need to put the Velcro around the perimeter here to where the sheeting is going to attach itself so it has a little resistance against the spray of the water. But other than that, this bottom barrier is done. The hooks were done before, so final step now is to get the grommets into this plastic sheeting and get them hooked up, and we'll be all done. Construction is just about complete. I've got the plastic sheeting up all the way around the perimeter and secured to the lower barrier again so it doesn't push back when hit with water and end up draining on the wrong side of that barrier. This is 4 mil plastic sheeting. I ended up cutting it into 3 separate panels just to make them manageable to pull down and store away. Reinforced the top edge with the remaining black tape that I had that I used to waterproof the bottom barrier. Ran out of the tape along the back here, so that's reinforced with just some similar clear tape. Either way, adds a little strength. It'll do the job to help those grommets stay in place. Earlier I talked about possibly using zip ties to lower down this sheeting from the ceiling just a little bit for some air space. I decided not to do that. Just the hooks themselves leave a little bit of a gap, but really I don't think it's going to make a difference to have any additional airspace in terms of moving air out of this area. So yeah, 3 sheets in the corners there. There's quite a bit of overlap. This side sheet goes behind the back panel. I'm not going to earn any style points for the cuts of the sheeting along the bottom, but it'll do the job. It's going to direct the water onto that sloped edge and keep it inside the frame here. So, here at the exit, the garage door, I've got it held up by just some 1-inch pavers, enough room to let the water get out, let the hose come in. Hopefully, if I'm working in here in the evening or nighttime, it's small enough gap to keep the worst of the bugs out. That remains to be seen. This is one of 2 configurations I intend to do with the garage door down. Momentarily, I'm going to adjust this panel here because it interferes with the garage door. No such issue on this side, but over here, I want to alter this in a way that allows me to have the garage door partially and fully open. So I'll have to get creative with some Velcro and how I drop this down to be underneath the door. So I got a little bit more to do to make that second option for how to have the garage door. And then also, I'm going to do a little bit of sheeting around the garage door opener. I don't know that water is going to be spraying up quite that high to the outlet, but I'll put some electrical tape over that open plug, and then last, put a little bit of sheeting here on the door, particularly around that spring so it doesn't get any corrosion. I'm not so much worried about the door itself. It's either galvanized or aluminum. May try to cover the hinges and rollers a little bit, but a little bit more work to do to finish up the couple different configurations, and then we'll be ready to go. But prior to those changes or that a little bit of additional work. I'm going to do a spray test to see how this performs.